In the depths of despair, a glimmer of hope shone through the wreckage of a life cruelly shattered. This is not just a tale of tragedy, it's a saga of resilience, rebirth, and the power of love that transcends the darkest hour. Join us as we unfold the incredible journey of one man's rise from the ashes. My name is Alex Brown. To be turned horrific, my life in the previous year or so would have to improve significantly. There are two causes, actually three for that. First and foremost, I was engaged in an accident while riding my motorcycle around a year ago when a driver hit me on the highway. All I could do was blink my eyes and breathe. I could swallow with some difficulty, but only when I was drinking liquids or when my food was ready. I couldn't even chew, speak, or feel anything below the neck. Don't even ask me about going to the restroom. All of the physicians in the hospital told me I was lucky to be alive. Thanks to the multi-million-dollar payment I received from the transportation firm, all of my medical expenditures were covered, and I now got a monthly stipend to sustain my wife, Emily, and me for the rest of our lives. With that, my disability and the money my wife earned at her job, I thought would be well financially. I stayed in the hospital for 6 months before being permitted to return home, and that's when my life got worse. How is that? The counselor inquired, staring at me intently. I am so ashamed. I don't think I can even recall what happened in those 6 months, I said, a tear running down my cheek. That's okay, she responded, everything you say here will be kept confidential. Remember that I'm here to help you heal. I nodded and took a glass of water before proceeding. Let us start with your marriage. Tell me a little about it. I told her about my marriage to Emily, how we met in college and married after we both graduated around the time of my injury. I was only 25, and we'd been married for 3 years. I worked as a mechanical engineer, and she was a paralegal at a large law company downtown. We were able to afford a spacious 3-bedroom apartment. Originally, we intended to convert one bedroom into a nursery. Both of us utilized the second bedroom as an office. However, after my injury, the nursery was transformed into my room because it was large enough to house all of my medical equipment. Emily did everything she could to care for me over the first month or so, but it was evident that she wasn't up for it, especially the bathroom supplies. So, she sought assistance from our neighbors, Tom and Laura Smith. At the time, I considered them friends, and because he was an attorney at Emily's firm, he frequently drove her to work. Laura was a nurse at a nearby hospital, so she would check in on me from time to time to ensure I was okay. She even helped us get a home health nurse to check on me during the day. After a month, it was clear that Emily, even with all of her assistance, was not up to the task. That's when Tom stepped in. The counselor inquired. Yes, it all began innocently enough, but I could see he had feelings for my wife. She frequently broke down crying, and he was always there to soothe her. I could hear them in the front room, kissing on our couch. Then he would take her into what used to be our master bedroom and make love to her. But it didn't end there, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The counselor inquired, didn't it end there? I shook my head no. Afterward, he would come into my room and haunt me. He told me how he felt after being intimate with my wife. I saw the counselor's expression. I'm sorry, I replied. Where was his wife throughout this? The counselor inquired. Was she working? Yes, she frequently worked odd shifts, and it was not uncommon for her to be gone all night on the graveyard shift, I explained. I see, the counselor replied. Go on. I took a big breath before proceeding. After approximately a month, he entered my room as Emily was taking a shower. I felt so ashamed that I couldn't finish my statement. Did he exert control over you? The counselor inquired. I nodded as I wiped the tears from my face. Yes, I replied gently. How often did this occur? The counselor inquired. I do not know, perhaps a couple of times per week for around 4 months. He even said he was going to invite some of his friends over to have fun with me, I said, my voice trembling. Did your wife know what was going on? The counselor inquired. I shrugged my shoulders, I do not know. She was never present when it happened. She would always come back later and rave about how great it was we had friends like Tom who helped look after me. I'll never forget the day he hauled in that awful monitor and installed it on my dresser. He linked it up to a camera and made me watch while he was intimate with my wife. Emily thought it was great that he brought it in, oblivious to its true purpose. When did the control stop? The counselor inquired. The day Dr. Franklin Steiner stopped by to see me. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Emily brought Dr. Steiner and my attorney into my room, just a few hours after I had been seized by morning. Dr. Steiner was an older, slightly shorter, balding man with a German accent, I recalled. I reflected on the visit. Tim, there's a Dr. Steiner here to see you, Emily remarked as she led him into my room. Dr. Steiner approached and introduced himself to me. He also introduced an assistant with a tablet. My lawyer, Alan Harrison, was also present. Tim, my name is Dr. Franklin Steiner, and I'm here to discuss a possible solution for your issue, he said, looking at Emily before proceeding. He told Missy, I'll take care of it from here, please wait in another room. She exited the room, but I noticed a concerned expression on her face. He returned my gaze, pulled up a chair, and sat facing me before speaking. Tim, let me explain. I operate a high-end research facility on Lake Arrowhead. We've been conducting revolutionary research on 3D bone restoration and nerve healing implants. I believe your situation is tailor-made for us. I glanced at your record, and I know how much damage you've sustained, he continued. I believe we can help you regain the most, if not all, of your physical ability. Is this something you might be interested in? Please blink once for yes, twice for no. What else could I say about something like this? Of course, I blinked once. Good, he responded, smiling. Now you must understand that this is all an experiment, however, we have received approval for human testing. Furthermore, we are grateful for external grants. It will cost you absolutely nothing, Dr. Steiner reassured me. That was wonderful news, but I was apprehensive about this being an experiment. I understand you're concerned about something being experimental, he said, as if reading my mind. Don't let that bother you. Even if the operation fails, you will not be any worse off than you are today. But I think you're a solid candidate, and I'm confident that everything will be okay. In fact, if we succeed as I believe we will, you will be stronger than you were before the catastrophe, Dr. Steiner said, giving me hope. So I listened as he described the technique. Basically, he said that all of the injured vertebrae would be replaced with new vertebrae composed of a composite material that was stronger than the original. Furthermore, the new vertebrae would be created using a 3D printer and data from my own body. In principle, the new bones would be identical replicas of the previous ones, just stronger. In addition, he would put tiny electrical implants to assist the injured nerves. The operation would take 3 to 4 hours, and the recuperation period could be several days, depending on how quickly I healed. Dr. Steiner also stated that he had already evaluated the data from my stay and began the process of building the new bones. I hope you don't mind, he added. Initially, we wanted to test if we could recreate the damaged bone using data from your records. We chose to proceed with the operation after determining that we could. Once I was strong enough, I would go through physical therapy, which he suggested could last a few weeks. So is this something you want to try? He asked. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Of course, I blinked once. He smiled as he rubbed his hands together, very good. He motioned his helper to join us, please allow Mr. Robinson to read the agreement." The assistant came over and held the tablet as I read the agreement. When I was finished, Dr. Steiner asked whether I agreed again, ordering me to blink once to confirm. I blinked once, and he instructed his aide to have me electronically sign with my thumbprint. After that, Alan countersigned, indicating that he had witnessed my approval to the operation. "Are you ready to start?" he asked. Of course, I blinked once. He smiled, "Then let us get underway. Do not worry, we have everything you need at the facility." He indicated for his aide to take me out of the apartment into a large van waiting in the parking area. Emily stopped us on our way out. "Where are you going?" she asked. Dr. Steiner gazed at her before responding, "Your husband has agreed to a treatment that could help him get back on his feet." "Where are you bringing him? How long will he be away? How much will this cost?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "We're bringing him to my facility on Lake Arrowhead. He could be gone for several weeks, depending on how well he responds to the treatment and rehabilitation. His doctor and lawyer are completely aware of what is going on. Both they and your hubby have given their consent. Cost is not a concern," the doctor stated. "Now if you don't mind, let's get started," Dr. Steiner suggested, and with that, we set out. I could see Emily standing in the parking lot, watching us depart. I had no idea what she was thinking, but I felt like I'd just been freed from a hostage situation. A few hours later, we arrived at the facility, and I was shown to a very lovely room where several nurses began prepping me for the treatment. "I hope you don't mind, Tim, but I felt it was important to get started straight away," Dr. Steiner stated, resorting to the nurses. "Please bring him to the surgical room when you have prepared him." "Yes, Dr. Steiner," one of the nurses said. "Okay, Tim, I'll leave you in the skilled hands of your nurses and see you in New York," he informed me before leaving. They had me undressed, bathed, and put in a robe, you know, the type that exposes you in the back. They put me on a stretcher and carried me into the operating room, where 3 extremely large orderlies carefully scooped me up and placed me face down on the table. The anesthesiologist performed his job, and the last thing I heard before leaving was Dr. Steiner exclaiming, I had no idea what he was referring to. I awoke, still face down, but this time I was in some sort of device that kept me immobile. I had a tube down my mouth and an IV inserted into my arm. My right arm was fitted with a blood pressure bracelet. Suddenly, the contraption rotated, and I found myself looking up at Dr. Steiner. "Are you awake?" he said. "Good. You'll be pleased to hear that the operation went smoothly. We'll have to keep you motionless for a few days to ensure proper healing. We had to replace a lot, after all. You may have tingling or itching in your back, that is normal. That means the implants are performing their function. Both the nurses and I will keep a careful eye on you. The apparatus you were in will periodically rotate your body, so do not be alarmed. Just try to relax for now." Okay, I thought to myself. What else would I do? He was correct about one thing. I did experience a tingling sensation in the center of my back, which irritated me to no end. I could feel the itching and wanted to scratch, but I couldn't. As unpleasant as it was refreshing to feel something for the first time in almost a year. That night, 2 nurses came in to wash me down. I could feel them washing my legs, buttocks, and back. I was more than surprised, I was shocked. I could really feel what they were doing. They rolled over the bed and started washing me from the front. That's when I caught a good look at them. They were both very young and gorgeous. One had shoulder-length blonde hair, while the other was a brunette. As they observed me, I felt something else I hadn't felt in a long time. I couldn't move my head, but I noticed a smile on their faces as they observed me. The blonde gazed at me. "Well, I'm no doctor, but it appears that something is working down here," she added with a smile. They giggled slightly but continued to do their work. They finished what they were doing and departed the room, but not before offering me some encouragement. I ended up being in the device for 4 days. The days were pretty much the same. Every morning, I had X-rays taken, and nurses massaged my arms and legs. Later in the day, I received a thorough sponge bath. As the days passed, I became more aware of what was happening to me. On the 4th day, Dr. Steiner entered the room and carefully sat next to me. He took out a pin and rapidly jabbed me in the leg. I felt something and made a noise. "Did you feel something?" he asked. I blinked once and attempted to nod my head, but I couldn't because it was still strapped down. "Very good," he said. He asked me to try moving my toes. I was surprised to learn that I could. Then he instructed me to move my fingers, and I did. "Outstanding," he exclaimed. He checked my X-rays thoroughly and summoned some nurses. "I believe it is time to get Mr. Robinson out of this contraption." They took the tube out of my throat, removed my catheter, disconnected all of the tubes, and released me from the device. Then they transferred me to a gurney and took me to my room, where they placed me in a bed. He spoke with the nurses before sitting down next to me. "I can't express how happy I am with your results," he said. "We'll need to start your physical therapy right away and begin with some exercises you can do in bed. I do not want to put too much pressure on your back just yet." He inserted a cup with a straw into my mouth. "Take a drink." I did, and it felt great going down my throat. "Try to say something," he said after I swallowed. "Wow," I croaked. He laughed and nodded his head. "That'll do," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like a new man," I replied, my voice still very weak. I could feel my eyes beginning to water. This was the first time I'd been able to do or say anything since my accident. He pulled out a tissue and wiped my eyes. "I understand that this is a very emotional moment for you, Tim. For now, I want you to relax and do not try to overdo it. Your back still needs to heal, but the implants appear to be working properly. I'm concerned that you may have lost muscle mass since the accident, so we'll set you up with a diet and exercise plan. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the staff members who will be caring for you." He waved his hand, and several young women entered the room. "This is Angela, your dietitian. Ingrid will be your physical therapist," he explained, referring to a short-haired muscular blonde who nodded once. "Linda will be your day nurse," pointing to a small woman with short dark hair, "and this is Kirsten, your night nurse," he said, pointing to a taller red-haired woman whose eyes twinkled when she smiled at me. "Nice to meet you," I managed to say. "Now if there is anything you need, please feel free to let us know," Dr. Steiner said. "We all live here at the facility, so we're available 24 hours a day." He motioned for the women to leave the room for a bit, then turned back to me. "Tim, I need to speak with you about something. This is a delicate subject, so if you feel a bit uncomfortable, let me know." "I'm curious," I said. "I noticed a fair amount of rectal damage when we started the procedure on you. I also took samples of something I found in that area. I'm not here to judge, but I was just wondering." "No," I croaked, more than a bit embarrassed. "I see," he said. "So you were controlled." Tears began to fall down my cheek. "Yes, I managed to get out." He wiped my face before speaking. "You know, I have an obligation to report this to the authorities. It's a felony to control a disabled person. It's also considered a hate crime. I took samples of what I found, and the lab is doing analysis, including DNA. Do you know who did this to you?" "Yes," I replied gently. "Was your wife involved?" he asked. "I don't know. She was never around when he did it." "I see," he said. Are you willing to name the person who did this to you? I nodded my head, yes. Once we have the analysis, I'll contact the authorities. In the meantime, I'll set you up with a counselor. Thanks, you're welcome. Now let's concentrate on getting you back on your feet, shall we? They attached a device to the head of my large bed that allowed me to lift weights while laying down, but Dr. Steiner didn't want me to use it just yet. For the first week, they simply had me do hand exercises, and they brought in a machine so I could do leg exercises. Ingrid turned out to be quite the therapist, as she called cadence, it's zwei drei vier, she counted in German, as I pushed with one foot and then the other. I couldn't help but notice that her accent was far more pronounced than Dr. Steiner's. She would have made a good drill instructor, I thought, as she pushed me to go faster. Gut, she declared, we'll feed you some protein and get those muscles back in shape. Soon, every Fräulein in town will be after you, and probably a frustrated Hausfrau too, she added with a wicked laugh. And that brings us to the present, looking at the counselor who patiently listened to my story. She put her pen down and looked at me. Tim, these next few weeks are going to be very difficult for you. Frankly, I don't know which is going to be harder, the physical recovery or the emotional one. I'm glad you feel you can talk to me about this, and I hope you take action against those who controlled and neglected you. They violated the law and need to be dealt with. I want you to know that I'm here for you, and you can talk to me anytime you need. Okay, thanks, I said. With that, the session ended, and I was wheeled back to my room. A couple of days later, Dr. Steiner came into my room, escorting a couple of men wearing dark suits. I noticed Alan was with them. After chasing the nurses out of my room, the doctor sat down next to me. Tim, these men are here to discuss your situation at home. I took the liberty of calling your lawyer as well. I hope you don't mind. Not at all, I said. Alan seemed shocked when he heard me speak. You're looking much better, Tim, he said as he stood over me. I smiled and reached out to shake his hand, surprised he accepted and shook my hand. Thank you. I'm feeling much better. I can even eat on my own now. He is doing quite well, Dr. Steiner said. If all goes well, he'll be even stronger than he was before the accident. That's good to hear, Alan said. Tim, this is Agent Smith and Agent Jones with the state police. They're here to take your statement. Are you up to speaking with them? Absolutely. The three men pulled up chairs, and Agent Smith pulled out a recorder. Mr. Robinson, I hope you don't mind if we record this interview, he asked. Not at all, I said. They spent the next hour taking notes and asking questions as I recalled the previous 4 months of control at the hand of the person I thought was my friend. This was the third time I had to admit what was done to me, and it was just as humiliating and painful. And you say this Mr. Atkins is the man who assaulted you repeatedly? Agent Smith asked. Yes, I said. I have the sample I took from Mr. Robinson, along with the analysis. Dr. Steiner said there was significant rectal damage that had to be taken care of. That's all in my report. We'll need to take that into evidence, Agent Smith said. Dr. Steiner nodded his head. Tell me, Mr. Robinson, looking back at me, is this the same Don Akins who works at the law firm of McMaster and Williams? Yes, it is, I said. And your wife works at this firm as well? Yes, she does, I told him. And you alleged that the two of them have been involved in an affair during this time? That's correct, I told him. Was she ever present when the assaults took place? Agent Smith inquired. I shake my head. She was in the apartment, but never in the same room as I recall. In fact, she seemed to assume that he was assisting me somehow. I see, the agent said. Nevertheless, we're going to have to bring her in as an accessory, even if she wasn't physically in the same room. It's difficult to believe she wouldn't have known something was going on. Tim, are you certain about all of this? Alan asked, astonished. I know Don Akins personally, and I find it hard to believe he would do something like this. Maybe you don't know him as well as you think, I asked rhetorically. You have both Dr. Steiner's report and the sample. I can't explain it, I suppose, assuming you're going to want a divorce from your wife? Absolutely, he nodded his head. All right, I will start the paperwork. I'll contact you before we file. I also seek a restraining order. I told him I didn't want either of them around me, and I definitely don't want them in my flat. Agent Smith stated that we will currently treat your flat as a potential crime scene. How much longer will Mr. Robinson remain here? He asked Dr. Steiner. Difficult to say, the doctor informed him. It would be at least another 5 weeks, if not more. It depends on how well he reacts to the treatment and therapy. Very nicely, Smith said, at least you'll be protected for a while. He turned to face his buddy, obtain a search warrant for the Robinson flat. Mrs. Robinson and Mr. Akins face arrest warrants. The other agent nodded and left the room. Smith turned around to face me. Just so you know, Mr. Robinson, if the need arises, we will charge your wife as an accessory. Are you willing to testify against her in court? Yes, I replied. Okay, he said quietly. Jones had already returned and given a thumbs up. Warrants will be ready when we return to the office. Smith nodded and packed his gear and the sample he had obtained from Dr. Steiner. We'll get in touch, Mr. Robinson, he said. I hope things work out for you. Thank you, I replied. After they went, Alan approached me. Tim, you're making serious charges. Don may lose everything, his work, his license, and possibly even his marriage. Are you 100% certain about this? I am 100% certain, Alan. I honestly do not care if he loses everything. In fact, given what he has done, he deserves to lose everything. I hope you are on my side in this. If you are not, please let me know right once, and I will find another counsel. I am on your side, Tim. It is just, I do not know. It's hard for me to believe. I met his wife and ate in their home. I've never seen anything to indicate he'd do something so dumb. Actually, he did, I asked. Can I also sue him? I see no reason why not. Alan stated that we live in one of the few states that allow alienation of affection cases, so I'll look into it as well. You should be aware, however, that they rarely travel far. I genuinely apologize for this, Tim. I had no idea. Not your fault. I had no method of telling anyone. We said our goodbyes, and he went. I felt slightly better, knowing something was going to be done. The next few weeks passed quickly. Ingrid quickly got me on my feet. At first, she made me walk on a treadmill, then she made me work with weights. Angela put me on a high-protein and fiber diet, and I started to observe my muscle mass returning to normal. Meanwhile, officials were assembling a case against Don and Beth. Alan believed it was prudent to keep the divorce papers until she was arrested. Agent Smith and Jones returned several times with state prosecutors, seeking more comprehensive details on the assaults for me. They informed me that the analysis confirmed that Dr. Steiner had retrieved Don's DNA from me. Alan also hired a private investigator to acquire evidence of their adultery. It was not difficult to accomplish because the two of them were so open about their romance. Apparently, Don's wife, Kathy, was unaware of their actions because she worked nights while they messed around and slept during the day while they were at work. After gathering proof and completing the paperwork, Alan came out to review it with me. He intended to file on the grounds of adultery, neglect, and cruelty. He had plenty of images, video, and audio evidence to support his claims. I didn't want to hear or see what they had done, especially because I'd seen and heard enough about them to last a lifetime. He also had paperwork against Don and planned to sue the firm for which they worked because Beth was technically his subordinate, and he had clearly violated company policy. He intended to report Don to the State Bar Association and had paperwork drawn up accusing him of various ethics violations. I couldn't help but notice that Beth never called the facility to check on my progress or came out to see how I was doing. Apparently, she and Don were too busy to bother with me. So I assumed this would pass, and it did. After 2 weeks, authorities raided the firm and arrested them. Alan's process server was also present, delivering the papers to all parties involved. My lawyer even alerted the media, which captured video of the 2 cheaters being placed in the back of police cruisers, shocked by the allegations and the evidence we had against them. Alan, the firm acted quickly and settled with him for the majority of what we asked for. They also fired both of them and reported Don to the state bar. Kathy learned of the arrest that day when Don called her from the county jail, telling her he was in jail and needed her to appear in court for his arraignment so she could post bail. Agent Smith and Jones met with Dr. Steiner, and the 3 of them took me to the courthouse for my arraignment. Kathy noticed me as I was wheeled in for the hearing and ran up to me. "How is he?" she asked Dr. Steiner. I looked up at her, I said, observing her reaction. It had been a year since she last heard me speak. "Your husband has repeatedly controlled me over the last 4 months, at the same time he has been screwing Beth." "You didn't know?" "My God," she said, "I had no idea what was going on. I've also filed for divorce from Beth and am suing Don for alienation of affection. If you want, I can give you my attorney's name in case you decide to file for divorce." "Darn right, I'm divorcing the jerk's son," she said. We entered the courtroom and saw the sheriffs bring Don and Beth in, both wearing orange jumpsuits with their hands and feet shackled and connected to another chain around their waist. They both looked bad. The state prosecutor requested that both be remanded without bail, citing Don's potential flight risk and a restraining order against Beth. He also informed the judge that I was going through medical treatment and had filed for divorce. The prosecutor expressed concern that Don might physically retaliate against me. The judge reviewed the paperwork in front of him and agreed, ordering them both held without bail until the hearing, which he scheduled for the following week. As they let Don and Beth leave, she saw me sitting in the back of the courtroom. Her eyes widened as I held up one hand with the middle finger extended. Kathy caught up with me after Agent Smith and Jones wheeled me out of the courtroom. She stopped them and knelt down to speak to me. "Tim, I can't tell you how sorry I am about all this. I really didn't know." "That's all right, Kathy," I told her. "How long are you going to be gone?" she asked. I shrugged my shoulders. "I don't know, maybe a few more weeks. They've really done a very good job. I can even walk around some now." "That's terrific. Please keep in touch and let me know how you're doing." "I will, Kathy." "We really need to go now," Miss Agent Smith said. Kathy nodded her head and stood up. "I understand. Take care of yourself, Tim." "Thanks, Kathy," I said. Agent Smith wheeled me out to the van. After we got back to the facility, I was taken to the physical therapy room where Ingrid had been waiting for me. "About time you showed up," she said. "Time to begin." She put me through my paces and even gave me extra exercises to make up for being late. I was sore by the time she was finished with me, but I felt good. After dinner, Kirsten stayed behind to check my vitals and do her paperwork. When she finished, she came to the bed, made sure I was comfortable, sat down, and looked at me for a few moments. Something seemed to be bothering her. "Is everything all right? You look like you have something on your mind." "I was just wondering something," she said. "What? Do you find me attractive?" "Absolutely. I think you're a lovely girl and a darn good nurse." "Why?" "It's just that, well, you haven't made a pass at me the whole time you've been here. I was wondering if I've done something to upset you or if maybe you don't find me attractive." I smiled at her before responding, "I'm actually very attracted to you. It's only that for one thing, I'm still married, and secondly, I'm simply learning how to go around all over again. Heck, I haven't even been able to speak for a year. Besides, what about your other patients?" "You're my sole patient," she said quietly. "Dr. Steiner is quite picky about who he assigns to the night shift." "I see. So our Dr. Steiner is not just a medical prodigy and a miracle worker, he's also something of a matchmaker." She laughed at that. "It's been known to happen." "Well, Kirsten, it so happens that I'm really partial to shy, gorgeous redheads, and I'm getting divorced. So there's that." She grinned widely, and her eyes twinkled. "Would it be acceptable if I kissed you good night?" "Absolutely." She leaned in and softly kissed me. After a second, the delicate kiss evolved into something more sensual, with our tongues battling into one another's lips. When she broke the kiss, I felt something. "I'm here for you all night, every night. If you ever need anything at all, call me, okay? I know you are. Back, as in up to love, but I just enjoy spending time with you." "I will promise," I said. She smiled and softly exited the room. I dozed off while reflecting on what she had said. Throughout the night, images of red-headed angels danced in my thoughts. The next several days passed quickly as Ingrid pushed me harder and harder. I discovered that I could walk several miles on the treadmill as my muscles strengthened to the point where I could bench press more weight than ever before. The daily X-rays revealed that my replacement vertebrae were performing even better than Dr. Steiner had projected, with the implants repairing nearly all of the damaged nerves. Kirsten kept company most evenings by reclining on the bed with me, watching television or simply talking. We would often share a bowl of popcorn while watching a movie and cuddle up with the ball on our laps. We always closed the evening with a few scorching kisses. I began to feel like a high school boy on a date with the most attractive girl in school. On top of that, I was falling hard for her. By the time Agent Smith and Jones arrived to pick me up for the major portion of Beth and Don's trial, I no longer required a wheelchair, but Dr. Steiner recommended that I use it anyhow, just to make sure I didn't injure myself, and he went along with it, not only to watch the injuries I incurred, but also to ensure that I recovered in one piece. I sat in my chair directly behind the prosecutor with Dr. Steiner next to me. Beth and Don entered the room and sat down next to their defense counsel. They looked over at me before whispering to their attorney. Kathy sat behind them, but she didn't seem happy. The jury, which had been chosen the day before, was seated, and the judge appeared with the bailiff issuing the order for everyone to stand up. Using the rail in front of me as support, I rose up and noticed Don and Beth's shocked expressions when the judge entered. He gave the order to sit, and we all sat down. Dr. Steiner calmly inquired if I was all right, and I nodded yes. The judge began the hearings by reading the lengthy list of allegations, noting that Don and Beth had both pleaded not guilty. After both sides had finished their opening comments, the court went to the prosecution attorney, who called me as his first witness. Dr. Steiner walked with me to ensure that I didn't fall, then he returned to his seat. After I sat in the witness chair, Don and Beth gazed at each other, shocked. They were even more startled when I talked. After the bailiff swore I would tell the truth, the prosecutor got up and walked up to me. He started by praising me on my progress, then I asked questions about my accident. I spent about a year as a quadriplegic. I understood why he was asking these questions. He was addressing the jury about my physical condition before my treatment at Dr. Steiner's institution. At this point, the majority of the questions were about my home life, namely how Beth attempted but was unable to care for me and how Kathy had arranged for home health care personnel to care for me during the day. "And at any time, did your wife ever attempt to meet your emotional needs?" the prosecutor inquired. "No, sir," I informed him. "Did she ever try to pleasure you sexually?" "No, she did not," I replied. Did she try? Would she have succeeded? I shook my head. No. I had no feeling below the neck. I see, he replied. Did she ever give you a hug, kiss you, or spend time with you, perhaps reading a book or watching TV? I considered my response carefully, but I couldn't recall her doing anything similar. She gave me the occasional kiss on the cheek, but that was it. Was she involved in your care? Did she feed you and help bathe you, perhaps assist you in the bathroom? She tried at first, but she wasn't up to the task. When did Mr. Atkins enter the picture? Almost from the start, I said. We were buddies before the accident. They lived next door, and we had spent time together before my accident. I see. So you weren't startled to see him at your apartment? Right, no. Like I thought we were buddies. They frequently came around, and we occasionally shared a beer or dinner. You say he and your wife had sex in your apartment. When did this start? I'm not sure exactly. They could have done it when I was in the hospital, but I'm not sure. I don't have confirmation of it. He frequently let her cry on his shoulder while they were both present. I believe it was about a month after I returned home from the hospital that I first heard them. Did you hear them? Yes. I could hear them kissing and moaning as if they were making out. Beth wiped her eyes as I recounted what I had heard. Then I overheard them, and what was once our bed where we made love. What happened then? The prosecutor inquired. He'd come into my room and teach me while she was showering. One day he brought in a monitor in a box and said it was so I could see a real man screw my wife. Beth and the jurors both gasped when they heard that. The prosecutor addressed the court, while the bailiff wheeled out a cart with a giant monitor and a black box. This is the monitor and box that Mr. Robinson is referring to. The box is a digital video recorder. The system also contained 2 video cameras, one in Mr. Robinson's master bedroom and the other in his lodging room. We duplicated several hours of video footage captured by the device. The prosecutor turned back to face me. Is it your testimony that Mr. Atkins used this so you could see him make love to your wife? Yes, I replied gently. Beth gazed at Don, shocked. You loser, she said. The judge hammered the gavel. He said that there was an order in court. Beth calmed down, and the prosecutor resumed. Did you realize that Mr. Atkins installed a camera in both your room and the master bedroom? I shake my head. This was new to me. How did your wife react to the monitor? The prosecutor inquired. She thought it was great that he had gotten it for me. Apparently, she assumed it was. So I could watch sports on television. Was it at this time that the power over you began? The prosecutor inquired. Yes, it was. Please explain to the court what would generally happen. The prosecutor stated. After Don and my wife had their fun, he'd come into my room and switch off the monitor, then he'd hoist me up and abuse me. Is this your testimony that he assaulted you? The prosecutor inquired. Yes, I responded embarrassed. Was your wife ever present when this occurred? The prosecutor inquired. Not that I am aware of. He always appeared to finish around the time she was done showering. She would then come into my room and tell me how beautiful it was we had a friend like Don who could look after me. How often did this occur? About 2 or 3 times a week, I stated. For how long? The prosecutor inquired. Approximately 4 months. I heard members of the jury gasp, and when I looked around, I noticed several of them staring at Beth and Don with venom in their eyes. Beth looked down at the table, while Don sat stoically looking straight ahead. So you estimate that this occurred around 35 times? The prosecutor inquired about that. Yes, I answered. Were you aware that Mr. Atkins was recording his time in your room? I shake my head. No, I was not. The prosecutor looked at the jurors. In reality, Mr. Atkins videotaped himself assaulting Mr. Robinson 36 times on this device, he said. He hesitated as the jurors took this in. Who needs enemies when you have such good friends? The prosecutor questioned rhetorically. The defense attorney objected, and the judge upheld his objection. That's all I have for this witness at the moment, he said. However, I reserve the discretion to recall Mr. Robinson to the stand. Very good, the judge said. Your witness, Mr. Green. Mr. Green set his table and looked up to me before speaking. Mr. Robinson, I'm sorry to read about your injuries, and I hope you get better soon. Thank you, I said, only one thing. He proceeded, did you ever tell Mr. Atkins that you didn't approve of his alleged actions? I was unable to. I was severely incapacitated at the time and could not even communicate, so the answer is no. Then he explained, that is because I couldn't, I said, becoming annoyed, so the answer is no. You also didn't tell anyone what happened, not even your wife, isn't this true? Now I was furious, that's because I was totally incapacitated and couldn't, you moron. I yelled, smashing my fist against the hefty wooden barrier in front of me for a time. Nobody said or did anything. I withdrew my hand away and discovered that I had cracked the railing. I didn't realize I'd hit it so hard. I looked at the judge before speaking. I apologize, Your Honor, I lost my patience. Do not do that again, he warned me. I nodded my head. That's all I had for this witness. Green spoke. The judge told me I may leave the stand, and Dr. Steiner arrived to accompany me back to my seat. The prosecutor next summoned Dr. Steiner to the stand. He informed the court of my injuries and the extent of my incapacity. He also stated that he had discovered severe damage, collected evidence, and tested samples before doing his best to repair the harm. He also discussed the procedure he had conducted and my progress since then. And in your expert view, Mr. Robinson could only have caused this harm if he had been assaulted, is that correct? The prosecutor inquired. Correct, Dr. Steiner stated that it would also explain the existence of proof. Thank you, the prosecutor stated that he turned to the jury, ladies and gentlemen, the state tested the sample, further testing and DNA analysis confirms the defendant, Mr. Donald Atkins, with 99.99% certainty. He turned to face the judge, that's all I had for this witness, Your Honor. The court said, your witness, Mr. Green. Thank you, Dr. Steiner, you run the Arrowhead Institute of Advanced Medical Research, is this correct? Yes, this is right. He mentioned that you perform some really cutting-edge research there, do you not? Green inquired. Sure, Dr. Stein said, breaking into his native German as he often did. Green took out a piece of paper and started reading. Each of us has different protection mechanisms that assist us deal with harsh events. Sometimes we fall back on a different version of ourselves. What you may call an alter ego could manifest itself in a variety of ways. A generally calm, unassuming person may suddenly become noisy, arrogant, and domineering, for example. Folks who are unfamiliar with that person's behavior may suddenly have a very different perception of him or her. He read before returning his attention to Dr. Steiner, you also talk about an inner beast that is dormant within each of us. According to your writings, you claim to have discovered a means to unleash the so-called beast to assist with a certain scenario. Is this true? He asked. I did write it, and certainly my study has revealed this to be true, Dr. Steiner explained. Isn't it true that you once worked with Mr. Bill Dalton and helped him discover his purported inner beast? Would simply be saying yes or no. Suffice, Green stated, I worked with Mr. Dalton, yes, Dr. Steiner. However, the nature of my work is a question of doctor-patient confidentiality. Isn't it true that near the end of his treatment, Mr. Dalton's residence unexpectedly exploded? Green asked. The prosecutor quickly protested, irrelevant, Your Honor. Your Honor, Green stated, we all saw Mr. Robinson's reaction. If you'll allow me, I believe there is a connection. The judge answered, I'll let it go for now, Mr. Green, but I'd prefer it if you could make your point and then move on. I will, Your Honor, thank you. Green claimed. He turned back to Dr. Steiner. Are you aware of what occurred at Mr. Dalton's home? Green asked. Dr. Steiner remarked, I remember seeing something about it on the news. I also recall the police reporting that Mrs. Dalton and her live-in lover were manufacturing medicines with highly volatile materials. I don't see the connection with this situation. According to police reports, Mrs. Dalton was observed racing out of the house, shouting about a monster. Green's death was presumably caused by the medication she and her lover were producing, according to Dr. Steiner. Your Honor, this is totally irrelevant to the case before the court today, and Mr. Green is fully aware of this. The prosecutor added, I insist that this line of questioning be stopped. I tend to agree. I have been more than fair. Mr. Green, please move on. Very well, Your Honor, I do not have any other questions for this witness. The judge discharged Dr. Steiner from the lawsuit and went on. The prosecutor summoned state agents who searched my residence. Both claimed to have found what appeared. Then he phoned home health care nurses who testified that they saw indicators of physical control. They noted it in their records, but the home care facility never followed up, so the reports fell through the bureaucratic cracks. I have one final piece of evidence, Your Honor, the prosecution stated. With your permission, I would like to play a portion of video taken during the assault against Mr. Robinson. Very well, the judge said. The prosecutor looked at the jurors. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you is shocking. He stated, I take no pleasure in this, but I believe it is necessary for you to see firsthand what Mr. Robinson had to go through for months. He turned on the monitor and started playing the video. The jury grimaced while watching Don. The prosecutor pauses the video and enlarges the image. Ladies and gentlemen, let there be no doubt in your minds as to who is committing this heinous act against a man who once considered him a friend. He said, after the jury took a few moments to look at the picture, I began to cry in shame. Again, the prosecutor pauses the video. He looked at the shocked jurors. I rest my case, he said with disgust. Mr. Green, you may present your case, the judge ruled. After the prosecutor sat down, Green rose and summoned Beth to the stand. Mrs. Robinson, he asked, is it true that you had a sexual affair with Mr. Atkins? Yes, it is, she replied quietly. Can you explain why? Green inquired. My husband, Tim, was severely injured, and I felt lost and hopeless. She claimed, he was available when I needed a shoulder to cry on. Yes, we had love, but that was it, just love, there's nothing more. Were you aware of what Mr. Atkins did to your husband? Green inquired. No, I was not. If you had known, what would you have done to stop him? Green asked. Yes, I would have. Thank you, Mrs. Robinson, that's it for now. He sat down and said, your witness, Mr. Johnson. The prosecutor got up and approached the monitor. He selected an image from the video that clearly showed both my face and Beth in the same frame. Mrs. Robinson, he began, you testified that you had no idea your husband was being controlled, is that correct? Yes, she replied. Look at his face in that video, the prosecutor said. The hurt and humiliation was obvious to anyone looking at the video. Do you expect this court to believe that you could look at your husband of 3 years in that condition and not know that something was wrong? It didn't cross my mind at the time, she said. Before Mrs. Atkins brought home health care workers into the home, did you ever once feed him or clean your husband? The prosecutor inquired. I tried, but I wasn't very good at it, she said. What about afterward? Did you even try to help? No, she said quietly. And why was that? The prosecutor inquired. I don't know. I thought Don was helping him, and I really didn't know what to do. The truth is, you basically abandoned him, didn't you? the prosecutor asked, eliciting an objection from Green. "I withdraw the question," Johnson quickly said. "You said your affair with Mr. Atkins was purely sexual, correct?" "That's right," she said, "and you claimed in your testimony that you still love your husband, right?" "Yes," she said. Walking back to his table, Johnson pulled out an audio recorder and a folder from his briefcase. He walked back to the bench. "Your Honor, this is a written report done by Samuel Jenkins, a private investigator hired by Mr. Robinson's attorney." Handing the report to the judge, a copy of this report and the audio was provided to Mr. Green as the accompanying affidavit shows. The report references an audio record of a conversation between the defendants made as they were out on a dinner date shortly after Mr. Robinson was admitted to Arrowhead. "With your permission, I'd like to play that audio for the jury." "Very good," the judge said. Johnson pressed a button on the recorder in the courtroom, and they could hear a conversation between Beth and Don. "So have you given any thought to what we discussed?" Don's voice said on the audio. "I have, and I admit I'm intrigued," Beth said. "Well, what do you think?" "I have to admit these last several months with you have been terrific," she said in the recording. "Much better than my life with Tim has ever been." "Are you sure we can pull this off?" "Of course," Don said, "I'm a lawyer. You know I can adjudicate to do whatever I want. Getting Tim declared a ward of the state would be a piece of cake. He can't take care of himself, and it's obvious you're not trained to take care of him. Frankly, I can't stomach the idea of it," she said. "I mean feeding him like a baby, wiping his drool, changing his diaper, and washing his butt. Yuck, it makes me sick just thinking about it. I need a man, a whole man, a real man like you. You and I both know this Steiner guy won't be able to do anything for him. All the doctors said he would be an invalid for the rest of his life. Once we get him declared incompetent, we can get hold of that huge settlement of his and go live like kings in Costa Rica, someplace. Wouldn't that be better than staying here, wiping the crap off little Timmy?" "Yeah, it would," she said. "What about Kathy, though? What about the jerk?" Don said. "Look, things haven't been that great between us for a long time. She wants kids, but I don't, and I'm frankly getting tired of her constant nagging. Anyway, I just want to make sure that you're not going to go soft on me and tell me you still love him after we get things rolling. That won't happen. I love you and only you." The prosecutor stopped the audio, then looked at Beth. "I felt as if my heart had just been torn out again. So you and your lover plan to have your husband declared incompetent so the two of you could grab his settlement money and run off to Costa Rica. So were you telling your lover the truth, or were you telling the truth here in court? Which is it, Mrs. Robinson? Please tell me now so I know whether or not to charge you with perjury." Tears ran down her face as she was now forced to publicly face her own duplicity. "I don't know," she cried. "I still loved him, but I loved Don too." She looked over at me. "Please, Tim, forgive me." I shook my head and looked away from her. Johnson looked at her disgusted. "I'm done with this witness," he said, walking away. The judge excused her, and Green called Don to the stand. "So Mr. Atkins," Green began after Don was sworn in, "we've seen video of you and Mr. Robinson. There's no denying what we all saw. I just have one question. At any time did Mr. Robinson indicate to you that he did not consent to your actions?" Not once. A sneer appeared on Don's face. "Thank you," Green stated, turning away. "Your witness," he told Johnson, who was already on his feet. "Mr. Atkins," Johnson began, "you graduated from Harvard Law School, did you not?" "Yes, I did," Don stated proudly. "And you graduated near the top of your class, didn't you?" "I did. In fact, I'm highly regarded as a top litigator in my firm." Johnson Green objected. "Relevance, Your Honor." He said, "Your Honor, I intend to show that Mr. Atkins not only knows the law, but he knew that Mr. Robinson could not possibly have denied consent." "Go ahead, Mr. Johnson." The judge said, "Thank you." He turned back to Don. "You knew that Mr. Robinson was disabled, didn't you?" Don sighed but said nothing. "Didn't you?" Johnson bellowed. "Yes, I knew," Don responded. "And you knew that the law in this state says persons with Mr. Robinson's disabilities are incapable of giving consent, didn't you?" Johnson asked. "Yes, I guess so." Johnson looked at him with disgust for a few moments, then shook his head. "I'm finished with this witness," Johnson said, walking away. "Any more witnesses, Mr. Green?" the judge asked. Green shook his head. "No, Your Honor, I rest my case." "Very well, we'll take 15 minutes and reconvene to hear closing arguments." He pounded his gavel and everyone left the courtroom. After the break, everyone returned, and the judge instructed the bailiff to have everyone stand as he entered. Once he was seated, we were all signaled to take our seats. "Mr. Green, deliver your final statement," the judge directed. Green rose and faced the jurors. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a difficult situation for all of us, and contrary to popular belief, we hope Mr. Robinson will improve. We've established that the attack occurred with Mr. Robinson, we're not debating that point. However, this is an issue involving consent or the lack thereof. Mrs. Robinson confessed under oath that she never told my client that she did not provide approval. Mr. Robinson was unaware that anything was amiss, and she had no idea the assault had occurred. As a result, you are forced to conclude that my client is not guilty." He took his seat, and the judge gestured for Johnson's closing statement. Johnson began, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your participation today. I realize this has been really difficult for all of you. The defense has attempted to avoid the issue by stating that Mr. Robinson never stated that he did not consent to what was being done to him. There is only one problem: Mr. Robinson was crippled, he could not talk or defend himself. Under the legislation in this state, people with disabilities like his are unable to provide or deny consent. Mr. Green understands this, so does the defendant, Akins, who happens to be a well-trained Harvard lawyer. They have admitted to the acts against Mr. Robinson. You have seen the video, you have heard the audio. The defendant sought to fraudulently declare Mr. Robinson incapacitated in order to seize what was rightly his and depart the country. The defendant, Akins, took Mr. Robinson's wife with the intention of taking Mr. Robinson's money while leaving his own wife high and dry. You've heard the defendant's plan and scheme against Mr. Robinson. The defense has not raised any doubts about what happened. Akins, the defendant, exercised control over Mr. Robinson, and Mrs. Robinson took no action in either case to put an end to it. In this state, control and willful neglect of a disabled person is considered a hate crime. That is why I am advocating for the highest punishment permitted by law. The state has done its duty, and now I ask that you do your part and give Mr. Robinson the justice he deserves." After Johnson had taken his seat, the judge issued his orders to the jury and sent them out to deliberate. He then ordered the rest of the court to recess. Dr. Steiner and I entered the hallway where Alan was waiting. "I just wanted to let you know that Beth has signed the divorce papers, she is not contesting anything. I just came back from filing them. The judge will sign them off in a day or two, and you'll be free in 6 months." "Free?" I asked cynically. "Why don't I feel free now?" "You have gone through a lot, young man," Dr. Steiner explained. "Believe me, it will get better." "I hope so," I responded. "And I believe I know just the person who can make you feel better," the doctor replied with a knowing smile. "You mean Kirsten?" I asked. Dr. Steiner grinned and nodded. "Yes, she truly likes you." You see, it was my turn to smile. I like her too, a lot. Good, Dr. Steiner responded. Just be careful. I don't want you to experience love for at least another 6 to 8 weeks. I do not want you to put too much strain on your back just now, he added, smiling. By the way, what's with that rail? How did I crack that thing? I just barely slapped it. It must be the nutrients we've given you as part of Ingrid's physical treatment, I said, nothing about that inner beast crap. He laughed. I mean, not at all. That's an entirely separate project. Besides, I wouldn't recommend it to you, not with the special vertebrae we've installed. We talked for a little longer, and after about an hour, Johnson poked his head into the corridor. Is the jury already back? I asked. He nodded his head. That was quick, yes. Johnson said hopefully, this is excellent news for us. We went through the motions again as everyone returned to the courtroom, and as the judge appeared, the bailiff instructed us all to rise. We all took our seats at his signal. Has the jury made a decision? He asked. We have, the jury foreman declared. The bailiff received the paperwork from the foreman and delivered it to the judge. After reading it to himself, he told Don and Beth to stand up. Green supported them. On the charges against the defendant Donnie Akins, how do you find? The judge asked. We find the defendant Donnie Akins guilty of all accusations, as well as the charges against defendant Beth Robinson, according to the foreman. How did you find? We found the defendant Beth Robinson not guilty of accessory to the control of a disabled person. Your Honor, the foreman also declared the defendant guilty of all other charges. The judge nodded his head, very well. Turning to the defendants, he unleashed his rage on them. I've seen and heard a lot in this courtroom over the years, but nothing as outrageous and egregious as what I witnessed today. To be honest, the two of you make me feel sick. You have not only mocked your marriages, but also the profession. That is why I am giving you the maximum sentence permitted by law. Mr. Atkins, as a well-trained lawyer and court officer, your actions disgust me beyond words. At the prosecutor's request, I am sentencing you to at least 450 years of hard labor, that's 12 years for each of the 36 counts of control, plus an additional 20 years for committing a hate crime. I've also included 8 years for conspiracy to commit fraud. Mrs. Robinson, I disagree with the jury's not guilty verdict. Personally, I don't understand how anyone with more than 2 brain cells could be unaware that your husband was being controlled. Nonetheless, I will follow the verdict. I will, however, give you the maximum sentence for criminal neglect, negligence, and conspiracy to commit fraud, which is 15 years in prison under state guidelines, with the possibility of parole in 10 years. He raised his gavel, but Green spoke to the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Robinson has just informed me that divorce papers have been filed and she wishes to speak with Mr. Robinson before being taken into custody. Are you okay with that, Mr. Robinson? The judge inquired. I can give her a few minutes, Your Honor, I said. He nodded his head. Very good. He pounded his gavel, declaring the court dismissed. Beth approached me as deputies prepared to take Don away. She said, "You look good to him." "Thank you," I replied. "I just wanted to apologize for everything that has happened. I honestly had no idea what he was doing to you. If I had known, I would have done everything in my power to stop it. I believe you persuade the jury of that. I did. However, say that I agree with the judge. I find it difficult to believe you aren't stupid. At any rate, you'll have 15 years to consider it." Was there anything else? Yes, she responded. I wanted you to know that I signed the divorce papers and will not fight you over them. That is what I heard. I told her, "Don't you want to know why it happened?" She asked. I shake my head. I really don't care. I told her, I'm sure it was all for greed and lust. You cheated me, plain and simple. The why really doesn't matter anymore. Do you think you could ever forgive me? She asked. Why is it all you cheating losers think you can come crawling and begging for forgiveness? I asked. You sure didn't give a darn about me when I needed you the most. To answer your question though, no. I don't intend to ever forgive you. Instead, I'm going to do my best to forget you exist. Was there anything else? I know you won't believe me, but I do love you, she said. I just wanted to tell you that before they take me to jail. You're correct. I don't believe you, but thanks for saying so. Anyway, I think you better get going. Those deputies don't look too happy over there. Okay, goodbye, Tim. With that, she walked away, tears in her eyes. At that point, I felt absolutely nothing for her. As I got up, Kathy came over to me. How are you, Tim? You look better than you have in a long time. Thanks, I'm doing much better, thanks to Dr. Steiner here. I just wanted to apologize for what my loser soon-to-be ex-husband did to you. I appreciate that, I told her. Did you get in touch with Alan? Yes, I did. Don's father insisted we get a prenuptial agreement before we got married, and it has a very strict infidelity clause in it. So Alan's going to have a field day with it. I'm glad to hear it. I told her if there's anything I can do to help her, let me know. Thanks. I may need to borrow some copies of those videos from you. No problem, I replied. Whatever you need. I'll be gone for a bit longer, but I'm sure Alan can use what he already has. One last thing, she said, I still have that key you guys gave me right after the accident. I'll get your place cleaned up and get Beth's things out of there if you want. That would be a big help, Kathy. Thanks. No problem. Good luck, and I'll see you soon, she added, giving me a kiss on the cheek. We watched as she left. I couldn't believe how foolish Don was to cheat on such a good woman. Are you finished flirting with all the women? Dr. Steiner asked. I'd want to get back to work if you don't mind, I said. Works for me, he said. But how are we going to go back? No problem. We'll take care of that for you, Agent Smith said from behind us. After all, we're the ones who brought you here at Dr. Steiner's request. I sat down in the wheelchair and he took me out to the car where we all climbed in. Actually, I was a bit relieved to have the wheelchair. I had been up and down much of the day and was feeling a bit fatigued and achy. We came back to the institution and Dr. Steiner brought me into my room where Kirsten was waiting for me. After supper, she helped get me ready for bed, then went into the bathroom where she changed into her sleepwear, which was actually just a long t-shirt. How do you feel? She inquired when she went into bed with me. Wiped out. It's been a long day. She kissed me and afterward had on my shoulder. Yes, it has. I know it's been hard, but it had to be done. Now you can start putting all that behind you, and I will be here to assist in any way I can. Before I spoke, I took a long look at her face. I love you, Kirsten, I said without thinking. She smiled softly and kissed my lips. I adore you, Tim. She rested her head on my shoulder and draped an arm across my chest. I felt happier than I had been in a long time. We soon fell asleep together. They completely exhausted me for the next 5 weeks. Ingrid's inner drill coach emerged, encouraging me to go further and quicker with each session. In addition, I was seeing the counselor twice a week to assist me in overcoming the loss of control I had experienced the previous year. Every day, they took X-rays to monitor the condition of my spine. Kirsten spent every night in my bed, and we grew to know each other rather well. Finally, Dr. Steiner said that I had recovered sufficiently to be sent home. By then, my body was in the best form it had ever been. However, he urged me to avoid from loving for another 3 weeks. He also scheduled me to come in twice a month for the following year so they could check my back. I was eager to get home but also knew I'd miss Kirsten. The day I was supposed to go, I wrote her a note expressing my affection for her. I also asked her to come see me anytime she wanted. I finished the note as Dr. Steiner entered my room in a wheelchair. I stared at him puzzled. By this point, I had learned to walk independently. After all, he shrugged his shoulders. Regulations, he stated. I understood as I sat in the wheelchair. I wished I'd never have to use one again. He pushed me to the pickup area outside where I glanced around for the Arrowhead van. Instead, I noticed a dark blue Toyota RAV for pulling up. The driver's side door opened, and I saw her, Kirsten, my red-headed angel of mercy. She came around to open the passenger door for me. Surprised, I looked at Dr. Steiner. Kirsten has a new assignment. She will be your live caretaker, that is unless you have an objection. Absolutely not, I replied, smiling. I shook his hand. Thank you, Dr. Steiner, for everything. You are welcome, he replied with a smile. I'll see you in a few weeks. He stared at Kirsten. Also, please take care of our boy. Okay, I will, she replied with a smile. After assisting me inside, she got into the automobile. I noticed numerous luggage had been stuffed into the back of the car. So how long will you be assigned to me? That depends on how long you need me. How long do you think it will be? A conservative estimate, I would estimate at least 60 years. Is this good with you? Darn straight it is, I said. She kissed me on the lips before pulling away and heading home. When we arrived home, I marked the date on the calendar when Dr. Steiner stated I may begin having love. As it turned out, that was the day after my divorce. Beth's decision was definitive, and sure, we did make love on the date I had designated on the calendar. However, it was far more than just love. As Alan had anticipated, my alienation of affection case against Don didn't get very far, which was fine. Kathy had eviscerated him throughout her divorce. Kathy remained in the apartment she had lived with Don and became close friends with Kirsten. Roughly 2 years after their divorce, she fell in love with a doctor and married him. I never saw Beth in prison, but I did learn that she was going to counseling. After 15 years, she was freed on parole and took a job as a waitress at a truck stop cafe on the interstate. Kirsten and I married around 6 months after my divorce was finalized. That was a good thing since she told me a few weeks after we returned from Hawaii that we were going to become parents. We had 2 more children after that and felt that was sufficient for the time being. Our love for one another remained strong, and when our youngest kid departed for college, we celebrated with a around-the-world vacation. Even after all these years, she remains my gorgeous red-headed angel of mercy. My vertebrae strengthened, and it appeared that I was in better shape than I had ever been. The implants also worked, and all of the nerve damage I had sustained from the accident was reversed. Dr. Steiner successfully repeated the operation multiple times over the next 10 years, and the method is now awaiting final approval. As I reflect on my life, I can't help but think of John Milton saying that every cloud has a silver lining. Yes, I went through hell for a year after the truck ran me over. That was my black cloud. But what I have today is better than any silver lining. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired. Take care.